Welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast number 601. I'm Tom Cagley, your host. Today, we feature my interview with Brian Weaver. Brian is the founder and CEO of Torch.AI. We covered a wide range of topics, including AI and Agile, the role of leadership in creating an environment where extraordinary results are possible. Brian serves as the CEO of Torch.AI and has more than 20 years of experience leading mission-driven, high-growth, technology-focused companies. Torch.AI helps leading organizations leverage artificial intelligence in a unique way via a proprietary enterprise data management software solution. Today, Torch.AI supports clients like H&amp with fraud detection and mitigation, and the U.S. Department of Defense with machine learning-enabled battleground investigations for all federal employees, supporting the determination of an individual's trustworthiness and security credentialing. Are you ready to talk about the CEO as a leader and visionary? It's time for the interview. Brian Weaver, welcome to the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here, Tom.
I'm glad we finally were able to make this. This is we're both ships passing in the night a couple of times.
It was, and I apologize, and I'm very appreciative. But yeah, I'm excited to be here, and hopefully it will be worth the wait.
Well, I'm sure it will be. Let's dive in. The whole idea of AI and is just that it is exactly a hot topic. And how do you actually define it? And especially, you're the CEO of Torch.AI. So what does that AI mean?
Well, the AI in Torch, we really we find ourselves on the pointy end of the spear in the space. It's very complex, and the problem is the AI part. A lot of people say it doesn't really have a lot of value because it's overused. Unfortunately, the industry would label things like robotic process automation and any kind of like application of an algorithm or a model as machine learning, even though it may not be accurate. What we do is we deal with the transportation orchestration of data, in real-time data in flight. And we are specialists in transforming that data with machine learning, allowing modules to not only stack, but learn from each other in kind of a combinatorial strategy. And we are specialists in doing that in very large enterprises with very high-risk problems that they're trying to solve. So for us, what we found was that, sort of the notion of machine learning, the algorithms are out there. There's tons of publicly available open source tools, but where companies were really struggling was the ability to rapidly apply them, low cost, faster time to value, but doing it at scale. I can look for a needle in a haystack. There's lots of fun tools out there, but if I have to do that at scale, I've got a massively compromised problem with all of the publicly available tools, commercially available tools that are out there. So we saw a huge opportunity in the market to actually build a framework that was very flexible and adaptable and solve for some of the kind of common problems that are inherent with deploying machine learning, and really focusing on, from a technical perspective, our customers are, very large organizations, federal government, that are dealing with very massive issues with either risk or compliance or what have you, where there's dollars at stake, lives at stake, where you got to get it right. We don't do nice to know analytics, and that's maybe an egregious way of saying it, but we avoid that. We're helping people, deal with massive amounts of transactions where there's a lot of, a fatal mistake there would crush a company. It's got to work. And what we are is specialists in enabling those types of organizations to actually apply the machine learning at scale and doing it elegantly with the products that we have. And so it's been really fun for us, but it's certainly a nuanced approach, a very massive market, but a little bit of a nuanced approach because we've sort of uncoupled, the industry and the typical technical stack a bit, which has been really, it's been fun. Not easy to do, but it's been fun.
Given that you're at the pointy edge, the pointy edge of the sword in terms of doing interesting things, how does that affect how you would create an organization that has a decent engineering culture?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. The first thing is that we, by design, have kept the sales organization relatively small. And today, this won't last forever, but one of my best sales folks has got a PhD in math, taught at West Point, an ex-NSA operator, really kind of interesting human beings. And even to that extent, we've got an engineering culture that starts with those kind of people. The metaphor I tell in the office, and I've been sort of testing this, and I'm going to test it with you today. I actually, I'm a non-technical executive, right? So I'm the CEO of the business. I've written software programs before and all that other stuff, but I'm certainly nowhere near it, not even in the same atmosphere or even universe as some of the guys that we have here. But I'm familiar enough, right? So but I still consider myself a non-technical CEO. So really, my job is to help build and shape the organization in a way that empowers and enables, certain things like obviously successful customer delivery, making sure that we're delivering value, but really kind of the innovation thing too. What I've found in the opportunity that I'm trying to, sort of exploit and help nurture is this metaphor, this notion that an engineer is an artist. And if you imagine a sculptor or a painter and the ecosystem around them, it's kind of easy to see. And it's in popular culture and all that, right? The artist is a creator. And I think of every one of the engineers at any of my companies, by the way, not just Torch, but specifically Torch, any of the engineers that work here, they are creating, they have an art form. And if you think about it that way, and then you think about the role of, say, the art broker, you think about the role of the gallery owner, the business manager, those people, if they're left to their own devices, will corrupt the soul and the art of the artist. You've got to keep the brush in the artist's hands, and you've got to encourage and nurture the creativity. And okay, granted, they may have some accountability, and they've got to produce, and they've got to solve a problem. But really, if you think about them as an artist, I think it changes the attitude and the culture in the organization, where you realize, if having an engineering culture is important to you, you've got to prioritize that. And you've got to make sure that everybody else respects those people. And the way that I've done that is by sharing that metaphor in the walls here. So I don't let the art broker go yell at the artist to crank out more art so they can sell, or the gallery owner making sure that they've got X number of pieces for a show or whatever. That, again, it corrupts it in some ways. There's still accountability and there still has to be some rails. But I think generally, if you respect the art and the artist, the organization can kind of build that culture. So that's what I've been doing here. And certainly, we I think are doing a good job, but, you're always have room for improvement. But that's, that's what I celebrate in the walls here. And so far, so good. We've got incredible talent. We continue to attract incredible talent, but we've actively decided to prioritize that and do it that way. I can share you war stories where you've got others trying to assign admin or managerial tasks to artists, and it backfires, right? So it's just really step back and think about it for a moment. It's like, that's not their unique gift. So let's not try and have them, adapt or conform to the business guy's approach. Let's celebrate what they do. And so anyway, I think if you hold yourself accountable and you respect that, unique value, I think you'll win. I mean, and for us, we're doing, again, very hard things. You can't go to school for what we do. You have to learn it on your own, or you've got to be trained at our company, and you've got to be an explorer and an artist, and you got to celebrate that as a culture. So I think that's our approach. And I'd be interested to get your feedback on the metaphor.
No, I really like the metaphor, and it is actually a problem I and a few others have been contemplating, especially those that live in the agile world, because there's potentially a fundamentally different culture at two different levels. Now, do you see that the application of that metaphor changing when the organization triples in size next week, let's say?
No, because I think, we do a lot of work with, the Department of Defense and some others. And if you really think about like organizational dynamics, the best teams are small teams. And so whether it's a 5-man fire squad or an 11-man team or whatever, there are unit dynamics that I think can scale. And so that, I think, is the thing you got to consider. Do I need a 100-person engineering team? No way. Now, granted, 100 people is not huge, but really, if you think about it, what you're really trying to do is, build teams of effective human beings in as small a unit as possible, and then scale those units, not scale, necessarily the work or the head count. So I believe, and again, I don't think I'm foolish to think this, but I believe that we can sustain the culture that we have even with the growth. And right now we're experiencing tremendous growth. I mean, the company is doubling and tripling in size as we, attract more and more customers and more and more folks. Our goal is not to be huge, right? That's not the purpose of this business. The purpose is to evangelize a point of view around our technology. But at the same time, I absolutely think that if we continue to sort of repeat the mantra and hold ourselves accountable to certain things, and really, as the business grows, the operators come in, right? The COO and the CFO start getting a heavier hand, and they need to justify their own position. So they start measuring efficiencies, which means just, trying to eliminate waste, and they're held to a profitability standard. You've already begun down the path, where you're going to corrupt that whole culture. It can't be about that. Again, if I've got an operating business that's 30 years old, a good friend of mine, has a very successful business that's 30 years old and, mints money. They have to run it that way. That's different. I think when you have an emerging business that's trying to innovate as a key tenet of its existence, you've got to celebrate that culture and not let some of the operational controls corrupt your ability to innovate. I think that there's a fine line there that's got to be really, really, if you've got a good CEO, not saying that I am a good CEO, but if you have a good CEO, I believe that they can hold the organization accountable to those standards, the quality standards for that innovation.
How did you get there?
I made a shit ton of mistakes, excuse my language, but it's absolutely true. I did it the wrong way, a bunch, and been through a bunch of interesting situations. And I think, one of these days I'm going to write a book, and one of the chapters I've already decided is There's No Brochure. That's the title of one of these chapters. You can have all the mentors in the world and everything else, but there is nothing that replaces this first person experience. And I've been very successful at a young age. I started my first company when I was 26. It was wildly successful. That gave me ammunition to kind of entertain both flights of fancy and acquisitions. And because of that, I've had kind of a really interesting experience building companies, testing investment thesis, all these kind of experiences. And so because I've had a bit of that high volume experience, with both successes and with some failures, losing millions and millions of dollars, having companies, ideas and everything else that looked on the surface to be very successful, having, fail, you learn from that. And I think that wisdom comes from that first person experience. But I think that's where it comes from. And what's really crazy about where I'm at today is that I sort of am aware of that path. There's been a couple of things that have happened to me, even personally, that's forced me to sort of look backwards at my history, the path, and connect those dots and realize, some of those kind of moments that were hard were so valuable to me today, where I've got, very healthy, happy team. We're doing really fun stuff. We've got incredible customers. The business is growing in leaps and bounds on a lot of, different facets. But it was only enabled, when you look back at it, I required those mistakes to have happened, both with managing people, how you organize teams, my own attitudes about work. I mean, it's all of that combined. It's not any one thing. And again, I don't know, you need wisdom. And so maybe you can buy that wisdom. Maybe you can put a board together to bring some of that wisdom to you. But at least from my perspective as an owner operator of a business, I've had that first person experience and some gray hair to prove it.
Yeah. Sitting across my office here is a book that I occasionally reread that basically the title, if I can actually read it that far across the room, You Can't Teach a Kid to Ride a Bike at a Seminar. And I think that's, I think that captures a lot of exactly what you're saying. You have to have some of the knowledge, but then you have to go get the experience to have the wisdom.
Yeah, you got to fall off the bike. You have to do it yourself.
Yeah. That's why arguably training wheels aren't always the best way to learn. As a CEO of an organization, and especially in a very dynamic industry and something that, whether it's cutting edge or it's just rapidly changing, I think both of these would be relatively similar. How do you keep up with, your lead engineers?
I think my responsibility is to understand the applicability of the technology, right? So I think in an organization there should be, no matter how big or small, by the way, there's as the business grows, you got the notion of role specificity, and that's fine. And in a little tiny startup that might be, I think the average startup is like less than 7 people, right? So in a team that small, you've got a bunch of generalists. But somebody has to own the idea of the market that you're trying to, an opportunity that you're trying to exploit, and prioritize and focus those efforts around that. Sometimes what I find when I see other startups or speak with other founders, they've got really a broadly applicable technology, but they're trying to boil the ocean. And I've been guilty of that myself. So I'm very aware of the challenge. And in fact, that was kind of part of the genesis of the Torch business. But I think my obligation is to keep everybody focused and looking down the path at the target, so that they can innovate. It's not my job actually to even try and keep up with the technologies. Certainly some general familiarity is important, but I can't be as smart as they are. And while I am curious as just a human and the way I'm wired, I'm insanely curious and study all the time, and I'm just that kind of guy, I'm never going to be as smart as some of these guys. And so that's not my job. Their job is to innovate. And the question becomes not what can they teach me for my own ego, but how can I create a culture that holds them accountable to stretching themselves and learning themselves. And so we often ask a question, on that first part, hey, what are you doing new? What new languages are you looking at? What new frameworks are you looking at? What are you doing to, improve your resume? And we typically are attracting people that are really, really eager to stretch. Our whole world, again, in the AI ML world, there's a big opportunity to do that. Most of the people that we meet are actually very eager to explore and learn themselves because they're teaching themselves this technology, and it changes. So already inherent with the candidates that we have coming in, they have a desire to grow themselves. We just want to flame that, right? So I think that the better strategy for the operator, a guy in my seat, is to ask the question, hey, what are you doing that's innovative? We do a thing once a month where we do a bit of a show and tell. We give everybody, kind of a little badge of honor type thing, but they show off what innovation, individually, what innovation they have experienced or learned from that month. And they actually, stand up in front of the company and they talk about it. And they talk about how relevant it is to our mission at Torch. And I think then, I flip it around and go back to your question, and where my locus of control is making sure that we're focused. I have an obligation to make sure we have a healthy, sustainable company to put food on the table of all the employees and make sure that shareholders are getting value and all that other stuff. And the way I do that is by holding everybody accountable to the problems that we're trying to solve and trying to make sure that as an organization, we're always open to opportunities that would be aligned with what we do and our unique, or what I call asymmetric advantage, but that are very large things. We want to change the world. That is, we believe very firmly that we are doing that today, that we're making the world a better place, a safer place, a place with more trust. And so that's our North Star. And as the CEO, that's my job. So that's maybe how I solve that problem, right? I think it's corrosive if you've got a backseat driver or somebody that's trying to think for their engineers. I go back to the metaphor I used in the beginning. These guys are artists. They're unique, beautiful beings. And my job is to help celebrate their individual contribution and figure out how to rope that together in a value stream. My job is not to, try and dictate or micromanage. That would be counterproductive in a business like ours. I mean, it just wouldn't work.
Ah, come on. You have to get down there and tell them exactly how to write that line of code. I'm kidding.
Yeah.
Obviously,
No. Yeah. Listen, I am a bit of a control freak, very type A, but I have wisdom. If I had my druthers, I would sit behind one of the engineers that was working on, say, a UI component, and I would tell them what colors to make it, what the font size needed to be, whether it's capitalized. But I'm aware that that's my nature. My nature is to get my hands in it, but instead I've got to focus on other areas where I can exercise that need, my emotional need to have that kind of relevance to the business. but I got to do it in an area that's healthy. My wisdom has come from doing that the wrong way. And again, my advice to somebody maybe that's, a little younger and without as much wisdom is do not do that. You let your people own that and encourage that. Help them hold themselves to a higher standard, but don't do it for them. You need them to own it. You need them to have pride of authorship. You need them to be the best artist they can be. And if anything that you do to corrupt that, screws it up. I'm still human. I still make mistakes, but that's the goal.
Arguably, I would suggest what I'm hearing is the wisdom that you're deriving, or part of the wisdom at least, is the ability to learn. And that's sometimes very hard for people. I'd like to ask you one more sort of theoretical question. Let's say that this, the whole artist metaphor, and I really like that metaphor. I want to play with that just a hair. Let's say that lived inside of a normal hierarchical public organization. How does that artist ever make it up the ladder? Is that a place that an artist can go?
Absolutely. So I think one of the things that we use here is the notion of an assessment. There's lots of different types of tools. We happen to subscribe to one called Colby, which really helps illuminate how you as a human being, your character traits, and how you would make a decision. And it's kind of an interesting thing. There's millions of them. You could use them, I think, as a tool to help you develop a bit of a strategy around it. So I had a conversation this morning with one of our lead guys, a very, very valued employee in the company. And he is one of those artists, very special artists to me personally, and obviously to the business. And one of the things that we started talking about was his locus of control with the team that he manages. And instead of talking about KPIs and all the normal stuff, and we have KPIs, we run a normal business, we have utilization rates, we have all that normal governance-y kind of stuff. But that's a backdrop to the objective. We're really focused on outcomes. And I don't mean that just like the cliche version of that. We really are. We measure our productivity not by target utilization rates, which would be very normal for especially like an agile development team. Most people don't apply agile actually correctly anyway, if you really get into it. And you probably are very familiar with that with the time in the seat that you've had with this show. But again, I think what we landed on today with this particular manager inside the Torch business was that really some of that engineering artistry was his ability to craft a team and how he was going to develop a rubric for success. And really one of the things that I had communicated to him with some of the other folks in the room was that our goal was to build him a way where he could say, here's how I do it. And almost paint the picture that in the next job, you've had this great success with our company, and 10 or 15 years down the road, you're at another company and they've asked you to do it again for me. And you would easily be able to say, here's how I do it. I need a 5-man team. I need this type of person, that type of person, that type of person. And here's what we do. And here's how long it'll take. Here are the KPIs we're going to study. And the engineering artistry that it takes to put that team together becomes also one of those very intriguing notions. So his lies lit up. He's an engineer. He's a builder, right? He writes code for a living, loves the idea of designing systems and all this other stuff as an architect. But when you step out and you paint the picture in that way, he now becomes interested in expanding his knowledge and skill set to help enable scale inside the organization. But I think it's the approach. You're showing that artist that, hey, you can actually, exercise that itch in another domain, but use some of the same skill set and really get a lot of satisfaction out of it. But in the end, I'm creating talent. I'm trying to actually improve my talent pool by getting these folks to, learn and evolve and grow with the business by introducing them to new art challenges, right? New mediums. So I think in a large organization, one of the biggest problems that I see is that they're so focused on time, billable time, utilization rates, the efficient deployment of human capital. And they do miss, writ large, the ability to drive, really good value out of the best talent. They're really trying to manage to the bell curve. And I think that is the part that's really tough. If you have somebody that has some of these traits, first, use an assessment to try and suss out, where are those unique anomalies in the organization, people that have, a need to be creative, more creative than maybe defending or gathering information, and some of these other kind of personas that you might identify. And you got to figure out a way to harness those unique personalities in a systematic way. That can be from conversations like I had today with this particular lady that we talked to about how she was going to build her team, or it could be an actual systematic approach that your HR team might use to put some of the different creative talents in emerging or very difficult areas where their ability to rapidly deploy code, rapidly solve problems could be fully exercised, and you really build a system around those people. I think it's got to be one of those two approaches, or maybe a mix of both. But there's no easy answer. I think every organizational structure and culture is different. But I would recommend it's got to be one of those two to start.
Brian, this has been absolutely fantastic. Before we leave, if you woke up tomorrow morning and somebody immediately handed you the caffeinated beverage of your choice and gave you the power to change any two things that affect how organizations are run, what would those two things be and why?
I think the first lesson, and it's something that I struggle with every day, we try and live by, but it's not something that's ever done. I own my reaction. I own my opinion and my feelings about a particular situation. And by default, therefore, I don't own and I'm not responsible for others' emotional reactions in an organization. I think a lot of times there's a lot of wasted energy trying to figure out how to solve for interpersonal issues and chemistry that really it's maybe not even real. It ends up being fear manifesting itself in kind of an odd way in a team. And I think the idea, and something that we're adopting inside our business, is that, and again, it's a healthy thing, that you own your feelings. You own how you feel, and we'll all agree that we'll all own how we feel, and we're not going to throw it on somebody else. It's not their responsibility to evolve that. I think that's probably number one. And number two, I would say more transparency is super valuable. I don't know if the word fear is appropriate here or not, but I suspect that fear drives a lot of maybe call it negative or even neutral behavior, even some apathy potentially. And I think with more transparency on what people are thinking, what their motivations are, I think you can kind of break some of that down. I think you've got a perfect opportunity in these moments where a team gels, you've got an objective, everybody's over communicating, very clear on the direction, and that's magic. But when you have some people that have fear, worried about their situation, it does impede the progress a bit. And I would say those are the two things, the transparency and ownership of your situation that would radically solve, 99% of the problems in an organization.
Absolutely marvelous. Brian, if people wanted to continue the conversation, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, I've enjoyed actually connecting with people on LinkedIn. I'm not a crazy social media guy, but I'm on LinkedIn often enough, and I've enjoyed get a lot of requests to sort of help provide a sounding board and mentor folks and stuff like that, and I've enjoyed that. So I'm on LinkedIn, Brian G. Weaver, and would be happy to engage any of the listeners on anything they were curious about.
We'll have that information in the show notes. Brian, at this point, I open up the platform for you to promote anything you'd like. My only sort of advice is that the podcast has been around for 14 years, so selling your car on eBay, this is probably not the spot for that.
Yeah, Tom, I have enjoyed being on the show, and I think for me, the thing that I enjoy most is just sort of sharing a bit of the story. I've had an incredible journey. I'm very fortunate that I have found a bit of purpose not only in my professional life with what we do for a living day to day, the customers that we serve, but also personally. And so my only objective here and my only real desire is to try and help others. And so again, if any of this resonates with anybody, trying to do big things and be Herculean and dream a little bit, I'm excited to try and help. So I've enjoyed being on the show, and I appreciate the time.
Brian Weaver, CEO of Torch.AI, and obviously others, thank you for being on the Software Process and Measurement Cast.
Thanks, Tom.
This week, we begin our journey through Tame Your Workflow by Steve Tendon and Daniel Daron. The book is subtitled How Dr. Goldratt of The Goal Would Apply the Theory of Constraints to Rethink Knowledge Work Management. The title and the subtitle provide a hint to the number of ideas and concepts that we'll touch on as we reread the 357 pages that include a section about the organization of the book, an introduction, a prologue, 21 chapters, and an epilogue. The reread will focus on identifying the big ideas of operation flow and constraints management in knowledge work environments and how they can be leveraged for continuous improvement. Next week, we start Chapter 1, so get out there and buy your copy of Tame Your Workflow. Link in the show notes to support the authors and the blog. In the Software Process and SPaMCAST number 602, we will feature my interview with Duncan DeVore, the author of Reactive Application Development. Duncan and I talked about reactive design patterns, adopting a reactive architecture, and how writing a book changes your outlook on life. It was a really cool discussion that covered technical and non-technical topics. If process improvement is a never-ending journey, why do so many people ask, are we there yet?